So I'm very proud of that. Actually, as proud or more than anything I ever did as a commissioner, because Cascades Park, when I ran for office, I ran in 2003. I was elected in 2003, so it started in 2002.
Right.
I did my first commercial from what's now the parking lot above Cascades Park. And it was totally, barbed wire fence, brown field.
Ugly.
You couldn't go in there.
Right.
It was like, what are we doing here? We got this gorgeous land here right downtown. We can't get this. That was one of the flagship blueprint project.
Yeah.
And it's been a phenomenal success. I mean, it was designed to be a stormwater facility, which it is. And it's also a world-class amenity. We, through a lot of help, through a lot of people, got it done. And I get a lot of pleasure out of the fact that you can go there any time of day or night almost, and there are people from all walks of life using that park. And so it's what we wanted it to be.
From Fiore Communications, it's How I Got Here, a show of inspiring stories from Tallahassee area leaders, business owners, and neighbors, all the challenges, opportunities, inspirations, the twists and turns of life that led them to where they are today. Everyone has a story worth telling, and I am really grateful that we get to bring a few of them to you. I truly have been changed by my conversations with these amazing people, and I'm confident you will be too. I'm Dave Fiore, and in this episode, I speak with Mark Mustian, attorney, author, and founder of the Word of South Festival of Literature and Music. Mark grew up in Tallahassee, learned discipline in the Leon High School band, and was elected student body president. At the beginning of his career, he said he had 3 life goals: be an attorney, teach, and write a book. While he would eventually accomplish all 3, he would also serve 10 years on the city commission, get appointed as Tallahassee Chamber Board Chair, and be instrumental in the creation of Cascades Park, turning a decades-long eyesore into a community treasure. Mark recently published his 3rd book, receiving great reviews and literary awards, but it's the impact of Word of South that he is perhaps best known for locally. Now more than 10 years old, the festival attracts national attention and talent, held appropriately in the park he helped make a reality. Mark is already working on his next novel, but wanted to keep the details under wraps, at least for now. We start our conversation about growing up in Tallahassee.
I went to the old Sealy School for first grade. Actually, before that, I went to Birdwood Kindergarten, which is now the building where the Young Actors is behind the shopping center there.
Yeah.
It's amazing the number of people from kindergarten that I still am in touch with and see, periodically. And then I was at first grade at the old Sealy School. It was one of the last years of that school that was where the police station is now by Lake Ella. And then they opened Timberlane Elementary, which became Gilchrist, because Mr. Gilchrist was our principal.
Okay.
And so I was there from 2nd to 5th grade, and then Ra for middle school and Leon for high school.
Huh. Okay. We're going to talk more about your dad and, later, a little more specifically. Tell us about your family growing up, your parents, your siblings. What was life like for you as a family unit growing up?
So I have a younger brother and a younger sister. I'm the oldest. And my dad was a hospital administrator at Tallahassee Memorial. My mom was a homemaker. She had been a secretary before and ended up with some other jobs. She worked in the legislature as an aide to a legislator for a while. But she sort of ran the roost at home. And my brother's 2 years younger and my sister's 5 years younger. It was really one of the pivotal parts of my life because I didn't have any older siblings. Nobody was telling me, oh, you need to do this or, this isn't cool, And so
right.
I remember in middle school, my mother bought my clothes and I was, I remember being ridiculed as being a nerd. And that, that impacted me. But part of that was just being the oldest without having any older siblings.
So I remember when I was young, I was like, my jeans were from Sears, that kind of thing. So
I didn't have jeans. I mean, that would have been too cool. So I had, I don't know what I had, but I didn't have that.
No corduroys. That was next level cool.
Yeah, no, I had no coolness about me then. So I played in the band actually, and started in elementary school. Back then, you could do it in the 5th grade, and actually. Mike Pate's wife, Judy,
Yeah.
was our band teacher in
Oh, really?
5th grade, yes.
Yeah,
And
I know
so-
Mike well and Judy. I didn't know she was a
yeah.
band director
Oh, yeah.
or music teacher.
Yeah, so I had played in the band in middle school and high school, actually. I played the trumpet. I was never very good, but I enjoyed being in it. There was something about making music with other people, even if you're not very good. It's a very cool thing. And so I stuck it out for the whole way through high school.
That is great. I was a band kid too, met my wife in the Marching Chiefs, so that was a big part of our life for a long time. So that's cool that you stuck it out. And there is something about the community of that and making music together that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's almost hard to describe, but I just remember, the band director at Leon, Mr. Jones, was legendary and legendarily tough. And people would ask me, so, well, what teacher had the most influence on you? Well, probably him. And I had him for 4 years. But he was, he demanded excellence and wanted you to demand excellence of yourself. And so we had a great band. I mean, really good.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so that was a formative experience.
Yeah. All right. So in spite of your self-proclaimed nerdiness and bandness, you still got elected student body president at Leon. So tell me about that experience and why you were interested in doing that.
Well, I don't, somehow I morphed from being a nerd. I had run for student body president, I guess it was, in middle school and lost. I finished third out of 4. So I don't know why things kind of switched around a little in high school. I guess I got in a service club and I had a lot more friends. And so it...
so you were shedding the nerdy persona
I guess. And so, yes, I was in student government and decided to run, and I managed to win. And the 2 people that ran against me are friends to this day and stayed, we all were in student government together. And so that was an interesting, I was glad I did it. I learned a lot, and it was a very rewarding thing too.
Yeah. You obviously went on to be a lawyer, but was that your plan coming out of high school? Did you know that that's what you wanted to do?
Yeah, pretty much. I speak to a lot of classes now about writing, and a lot of writers knew at like age 12 this is what they wanted to be, and I didn't. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I am a lawyer. And I think somebody had just asked me this just this week. I said, well, why did you end up doing that? And I said, well, I think my parents steered me in that direction. They knew my strengths. So, I was a good communicator. I was a good writer. I read. Science wasn't my thing particularly, so I wasn't going to be a doctor. I think they sort of helped push that. And I was, that was good with me.
Yeah. You ended up at University of Florida for undergrad first,
Yeah.
right? So what got you to Gainesville?
Well, mainly it was to get out of town because I had, I just, wanted to get away and sort of be on my own a little bit. And it was close enough where I could come back here anytime I wanted to. And so I've never regretted that decision. The one thing I regret a little bit, though, is that I look back on this now and go, what was I doing? I was anxious to get out of school. I wanted to be done with it. I wanted to be out in the working world. I wanted to be making money. And so I finished undergrad early. And I managed to start law school immediately after, and they were changing from the quarter system to semesters then, and so that got shortened. So I got through the whole thing in 6 years. And I look back now and go, well, why didn't I do the European study program? What was I doing? I graduated when I was 23 and went to work in Jacksonville. I worked for a small firm there,
Okay.
which was sort of a fluke, the way that whole thing came about. So I majored in finance in college. There was a professor, we had lived in Gainesville when I was a little kid before we moved to Tallahassee, and my father was a hospital administrator there. And so the professor, the first day of class, he's calling the roll, and he said, Mustian. He said, He goes, was your father a hospital administrator? I'm like, yeah. So anyway, this guy had been on the city commission in Gainesville and knew my dad, the finance professor. And so I got to know him. His name was Jim Richardson. And when it came time to decide about going to law school, I asked him, so, hey, do you have any suggestions? Because I was thinking about going to UVA or University of Florida. He said, well, why don't you go talk to these friends of mine in Jacksonville that are lawyers and see what they think. So I did. They were with a firm called, it's now not there anymore, called Freeman, Richardson, Watson, and Kelly. And it was the old Florida bond firm. This was the firm that did municipal bonds throughout the state. I never even heard of this stuff.
Right.
And so I ended up going to work for some people that broke off from that firm. And that's been my career as a lawyer for 40 years.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Field that you didn't even know existed ended up being your whole career.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of that one little thing, So it's amazing how things, just a little thing like that can shift your entire life.
Yeah. All right, so we'll jump around here a little bit. Have you always been a big reader and consuming literature? Has that been a part of your life kind of forever?
Yeah, pretty much. I spoke to a class at Thomas University Wednesday of this week, and we were talking about this. And so, I read a lot my entire life. It was started with the Hardy Boys. I had the entire Hardy Boy collection. I read all of those. And then, Lord of the Rings and Dune. I was big into that stuff. And I was in, sort of the upper placement English classes in high school and then in college. And a lot of the classics I didn't care for that much. And I remember specifically my freshman English literature class at University of Florida and what we read. I understand now why the professor assigned these, but half of them I hated. I mean, James Joyce, nah. Camus, nah. And then some I liked. I liked reading, but when I got to law school, those who've been to law school, they give you so much to read, you cannot possibly read it all. So I didn't read for pleasure at all during that. And then when I got out, I'm doing contract work, so I'm reading contracts all day. And so I'd sort of convinced myself, hey, I want to do something else at night. I'm not, But one of my law partners who did the same work I did, still read for pleasure. And he gave me this book, Undaunted Courage, which is the Stephen Ambrose book about the Lewis and Clark expedition. And it was excellent. And I read that, and so, it sort of got me back into it. So now I have a goal of reading 40 books a year, and I usually do it. I mean, including audiobooks is part of that. And mostly fiction, but not all. And so my wife reads a lot too. And so we don't have exactly the same taste, but if she says something's really, really good, then I'll read it.
All right. So how did you end up back in Tallahassee?
Well, the Tax Reform Act of 1986, which is still the applicable IRS code, was coming into play, and I could see it was going to change the business that I was in, and that the firm I was with was probably not going to fare as well as the firm I ended up going with. And this was a chance to come home. I'd been in Jacksonville for 3 years. I liked it okay. I didn't love it. And so the combination of those, I just said, well, I think I'll give this a shot. So I came back in 86.
Okay. So I know that we've talked about it some. You work in municipal finance. I know you talk about the bonds and everything, but I don't know what that means. So can you just give us a quick overview of what municipal finance is? And you're at Neighbors, Giblin, and Nickerson now, right? And where you've been for how many years?
Almost 40. It'll be 40 next year. So if you're a city or a county or a school district or a hospital, a nonprofit hospital, when you go to borrow money, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, rather than go to the bank, it's so large that they have to float a bond issue, which means you sell pieces of that to individuals or institutions around the country or even the world. And so that's what we do. We draw up the contracts for those. So, for instance, the city of Tallahassee, has borrowed some money this year, and we have a little different role there. We prepare the offering document, which describes to the investor, this is what you're purchasing, this is what the city's agreed to do, that sort of thing. But that's what we do. And there's, it would seem kind of dull and very niche, and it is to a degree, but there's a lot of variations, and there's people that specialize even within that. So most of my practice is a mixture of general governmental stuff and affordable housing. We do quite a lot of affordable housing issues, which are mostly apartment complexes with income restrictions and other restrictions to sort of benefit low and moderate income people.
When I hear bonds referenced, most of the time in my world and what I pay attention to, it's like sports teams, they want to build a new stadium. And then in the city or whoever puts out or creates a bond or whatever the right terminology is to help fund that multi-billion-dollar stadium.
Yeah, and it's just,
Or million, probably not billions, but many millions of dollars.
Yeah, many millions. So, you can argue that's maybe not the best use of, tax money and other things, but the concept's still the same. The city's agreed to pay, whatever the amount is. Well, they don't have that cash on hand. They need to go borrow it, and this is how they borrow it.
Okay. Interesting. I'm just interested in this. So if a city floats a bond, they get investors through that process. how do the investors make their money back? Just the interest on the payment?
Yeah, and the interest is tax exempt on that type of investment. Okay. So it's valuable to the investor beyond just the yield on the debt itself.
That seems like that would be a big difference. Okay. Well, thanks for explaining that.
Sure.
All right. Over the years, you've also been very involved in the community. You served as the chair of the Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce, which is a big deal in the business community. So why was serving on the chamber board important? And also serving, when you're the chair, you're also the voice of the chamber for that year. And there can be a lot to that depending on what's happening that year. So tell me why you were interested in serving that role and what you remember most from that time.
Well, I mean, when I moved back here, I wanted to be involved in the community. Once I moved back, I had really no intention to leave again, and I haven't. And there were various different ways. I was on several boards. I was on the board of Goodwill. I was on the library advisory board, and I eventually got onto the chamber board. And then, was asked would I be the president. Said, yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. So I did it. I think it was 1998 to 99. I was the president. And at that point, there were, big, not that different from today, but big fights between the business community and the environmental community. And a lot of the comp plan had just come into play, some years before. And so there's a lot of proposed comp plan amendments and, and jockeying about that. And so everybody was sort of at each other's throats. And so what came out of that was the whole Blueprint 2000 thing, because we, and I was one of the people that put this in motion. We said, well, why don't we sit down with a few of the more reasonable environmental people and see if we can't come to agreement on, certain things, so we're not just butting heads continually.
Yeah.
We had a series of, I don't know how many meetings, over pizza. We always brought pizza in. But we came up with this report, the Blueprint 2000 and beyond. And the blueprint, still exists in some extent today. It sort of morphed in certain directions. But shortly after that, then we had all these ideas. Hey, we really ought to do this. Why can't the governments agree just to do this? We all agree on this, but we need money to do it. And so the sales tax here, it had sort of a checkered history. It had been passed. The money was used for things not exactly what was voted on. So there's a lot of distrust about that. And so we got a referendum passed to extend the sales tax and really put it to use for these projects we'd come up with. And so I'm very proud of that. And actually, as proud or more than anything I ever did as a commissioner, because Cascades Park, when I ran for office, I ran in 2003. I was elected in 2003, so it started in 2002.
Right.
I did my first commercial from what's now the parking lot above Cascades Park. And it was totally, barbed wire fence, brown field.
Ugly.
You couldn't go in there. It was like, what are we doing here? We got this gorgeous land here right downtown. We can't get this. That was one of the flagship Blueprint project. Yeah. And it's been a phenomenal success. I mean, it was designed to be a stormwater facility, which it is, and it's also a world-class amenity. We, through a lot of help, through a lot of people, got it done. And I get a lot of pleasure out of the fact that you can go there any time of day or night almost, and there are people from all walks of life using that park. And so it's what we wanted it to be.
Yeah. When people come into town, who aren't familiar with Tallahassee, that is, to me, one of the best places to go. If you want to get a flavor for the whole city and all the people and all the things that it has, it really is kind of a very central communal place for people to gather. And it's beautiful.
So one of the things that people don't know about it is, and people sometimes will complain, well, why was the amphitheater done this way? Why didn't it face around the other way? Why was it covered? Blah, blah, blah. The ironic thing is originally there was no plans to have an amphitheater there. It was a band shell. And a group of citizens, it wasn't me, came and said, hey, we're going to do all this. We should have an outdoor, we can have performances here. So they suggested it. They put it all together. I mean, it's not perfect, but if you go down there and the weather's right, it is a wonderful place to see a show.
Yeah.
So I'm very glad, kudos to them. Jules Graham and some other folks pulled all that together.
Yeah, it's great. All right, so you mentioned it, but in 2002, you ran for city commission and won and served in that position for 10 years, which is 2.5 terms.
Right.
So what was the circumstances in you running and being elected in 2003?
Well, Charles Billings had passed away, who was a city commissioner. Mm-hmm. And the way the city's charter works, it depends on when that happens in the term, but the commissioners appoint the replacement. And so I had been considered for that appointment. I'd come off being chair of the chamber. We'd done blueprint, all this. And they appointed, I wasn't appointed, they appointed somebody else. But it made me sort of go through the thought process of, do I really want to do this? Is my family, are they okay with this? Mm-hmm. And so I kind of decided I did, and then they didn't pick me. And so the next election, the seat opened up because Steve Meisberg and John Paul Bailey both ran for mayor. And so those seats opened, and I ran for Steve's seat.
Okay.
And so I finished his term, and then I served 2 more terms.
Right. Okay. At the end of those 2.5 terms, well, let's talk about that. What do you remember most about your time as commissioner? It can be good or bad, I guess, but what sticks out to you most as your time in the service to the community as a commissioner?
Well, we had a very good commission. It changed a little bit while I was there, but most of the time, John Marks was elected at the same time I was. Andrew Gillum was elected at the same time I was.
Who was like 26 years old?
23,
23,
yeah.
Okay.
And remarkably poised and thoughtful for a 23-year-old.
For sure.
Way more than I would have been. And Alan Katz was on, and Debbie Lightsey was on. Okay. So that was where we started out. And it was a very, we didn't always agree, but, it was a very thoughtful, high-powered commission. We got a lot of good things done. Our staff was good. And I told people, because I represent cities and counties all over the state, so people would ask me, was this what you thought it would be? And I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what I thought it'd be. I knew what this was going to be
right.
like.
You went in eyes wide open.
For the most part. There were a couple of elements I wasn't as familiar with. But I would tell people around the state, other communities, they look to what Tallahassee's doing, what the government's doing, just to see, as a model. Because it's well thought out. It's, generally well funded. It was my pleasure to be there. I just saw this the other day. So when I left, I wrote an article for the Democrat, and it was I think it was called "Things I Learned in 10 Years Here." And I was looking back on it. It was the people at the League of Cities liked it so much they published it in the League of Cities. But it was again, it's things I learned. A lot of people would think public sector, they're just sitting up there getting a paycheck. Well, at least the people I worked with, they worked their tails off. As much or more than anybody in the private sector. And there were some issues about pensions. Local governments tend to give away the farm on pensions, and City of Tallahassee was not as bad as many, but it was an issue. So there was a number of things like that. It was just, I felt like I learned, in being there.
Why did you decide not to run for another term?
I'd been thinking about it, and then the guys in my law firm who'd been very supportive of me, doing this, and still staying with the law firm, and we had to give up representing the city or doing anything like that, were sort of getting tired of the situation. And I was a little tired of it too, and so I said, I think 10 years is probably enough here.
Well, that makes sense. As you know, things are pretty contentious at City Hall these days. I know that social media and different things can, highlight that more than in past years. Is what you're seeing now, is that a lot different than what you experienced? Is it just more public, or was it a kinder, gentler version when you were in office?
No, I don't. I've seen this in other communities. I've actually seen worse than this, believe it or not. Yeah. So, but I didn't experience anything like that at all. Again, we had disagreements. Major disagreements, but it was never sort of what seems like kind of a personal thing that it's gotten to now. I was asked to come speak to the City Commission retreat after I left, so I don't remember exactly when this was, but I remember advising them, said, well, hey, even if you're Thomas Jefferson, you got to get 2 other votes to do anything. This is a collegial body, and it's really not a great idea to get involved in someone else's campaign, against them, if you may have to serve with them. Well, no advice was more quickly, going out the window than that. So, it is where it is. People have asked me, so what do you think should be done? I don't really have any answers on that, I'm sad to say.
Yeah. All right, so at this point in your life, you've done the chamber and the blueprint and city commission, and you're still an attorney. But I read that you kind of had an epiphany about changing some direction and doing some different things with your life. And you started reading again and traveling. And so what kind of was happening at that point in your life?
Well, it actually probably started earlier. And I tell people this may have been like an early midlife crisis because I'd been a lawyer for like 10 years. I'm in my mid-30s. And I remember our clients are spread all around the state. So I spent a lot of time on I-10, I-75 by myself driving to meetings. And I remember thinking, said, well, I've been a lawyer for 10 years, got to be more than this. And so I said, well, I'd like to try and do some other things besides practicing law. And I'd like to maybe teach. I'd like to maybe run for public office, and I'd like to try and write a book. And so eventually I did all of those, and I taught for a couple of years at what was then Tallahassee Community College, and that was enough to cure me of wanting to do that. And then I ran for office and was elected and served for 10 years. But I started writing this book then. This was mid-'90s, I guess. I had this naive assumption I can just sit down and write a book and somebody would want it. And later saw somebody refer that as the equivalent of waking up one morning and saying, hey, I think I'll go practice thoracic surgery today. And so I was very fortunate to get that book published eventually. And then I've been able to...
And that was The Return.
That was The Return. And then the novel The Gendarme was published in 2010, and that got... won a lot of awards. It got published in 10 languages. And then Boy with Wings is the one that was published earlier this year.
So how do you make the jump to being a writer, to the commitment to the process and everything that's involved in writing a novel?
Well, I just discovered I liked doing it. And so with The Return, I started, my kids were little, so the only time I could do anything like this was first thing in the morning before everybody got up, because once they got up, it was chaos all day long. Sure. And then by the evening, I'm so exhausted I can't do anything. So I just discovered I liked it. It was sort of time to myself. It was time I could try and be creative. It was intellectually stimulating. And so I've just kept at it. And I did it. I tell people I did it, and I still do, every day. And if you do something every day, even for short periods of time, it's amazing what it ends up to after a year or so.
So what do you do every day? Just write something? Is it for something or just the discipline of writing?
It's usually for something, so it takes me forever to finish one of these. Like the Gendarme, start to finish, and that includes getting it published, probably 7 years. So, and there were some, wholesale changes in the middle of that and, edits by the editor and blah, blah, blah. But, it's just a lengthy process. And so you really got to be into it, if you're going to spend this much time. And these things, become like your children. So I still do. I did it this morning. I'll sit down and write for a period. It's the hardest thing for me in writing is just getting it down on the page to begin with. Once it's there, I can edit it, and that part, that's a lot easier. But just getting it down, and so I saw, I'm sort of self-taught in this. The last class I had was a freshman composition class in college. But I've studied a lot. I've read a lot of books. I've been critiqued by editors. So I have, I think, a better feel for it, and it tends to work well for me to do a little bit every day because it keeps my mind in it. So I'll think about things during the day and go, oh, yeah, I need to deal with this or address that or whatever. And then, because it's so slow, a month or two from now, I'll go back and read what I've written, and some things I'll go, yeah, this is pretty good. And then some will go, oh, my God.
What was I thinking?
No. So that's sort of been the process, and I enjoy it. I'm talking to other writers, and people do it all sorts of different ways. And some, I sit down, 6 hours every day. I couldn't do that. That would take a lot of the joy out of it. And so I don't, but I'm going to retire from the law practice in a few years, and I'm looking forward to just having a little bit more free time, because people ask me, well, how do you do all this stuff? Because Word of South, which we haven't talked about, is a whole other job almost. Sure. But I said, well, I watch very little TV. Seriously, I don't. I watch movies on planes, but otherwise I just don't. And so I'd like to be able to. I'm not dying to watch TV, but I'd like to see a few more movies. But that's sort of that's what I do.
So which part was harder, the writing of the book or getting it published, especially the first one?
They're all pretty hard. The getting published, I have, I'm very lucky and fortunate on this. I have defied long odds several times now, because the just the number of, of people who are good writers, it's like musicians. I mean, wow, there's a whole bunch that are great. And it's sort of a matter of luck and timing to be able to get it done. And the industry's changed since I first started. I mean, the return was published by Pineapple Press, which is a regional press in Florida. And that sort of happened because Terry Lewis, my friend, the judge, he had a book published
also
by
author,
them and had referred me to them. So I tell Terry, hey, you started all this. So this was the way it was 20 years ago. It's still this way to some degree. Everybody tells you, well, you have to have an agent to get a book published because otherwise nobody will look at it. That's not quite true, but it's, for the big guys, it's definitely true. And so I was unable to get an agent for the return. The way you were supposed to do it, and this is still sort of the same, is you would send out these what are called query letters, and they're sort of one-pagers about, here's who I am, here's what I've done, would you like to look at it? Some agents want to see a sample chapter and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And even though you gear yourself up for rejection, after about 30 or 40, you start to go, maybe this just isn't that good. And so after the return, I was able to get an agent for the Gendarme eventually. I was about on agent query letter number 80 when that happened. And then I have a new agent that I got for Board with Wings, same thing. I went back through the whole process again with that. So that's difficult. And then the publishing is, even with an agent, there's no guarantee, you're going to be published. And so I've experienced, sort of a range of different publishers. And in fact, I'm going to talk at an ARP event in December about getting published. And so I hope the information is useful. But, I've been with a regional publisher. I've been with one of the big five. And the most recent one is an independent publisher. And so it's different experiences each time. And, it's all worked out pretty well.
Yeah. And now, of course, with Amazon, you can self-publish, too,
exactly.
Which is a whole new avenue for people.
No, it is. And I tell people, if you want to write, well, think about what are you trying to do? Who is your audience? Is this for your grandkids to see? That's great. You can self-publish and give them something. Or are you trying to be the next John Grisham? Well, you've got a lot of work to do there. So, but that has changed. When I first started in this, self-publishing was really looked down on. This is like, vanity presses and that sort of thing. Right. There's an element of that, but that's changed a lot.
Sure. Yeah. And we'll be right back. How I Got Here is sponsored by Barano Heating and Air Conditioning in Tallahassee. I've been friends with Patrick Barano since we met in a chamber leads group about 15 years ago. I'll admit that I pursued him pretty hard to be his marketing firm and eventually won him over. And the reason I wanted to work with him is that I was already a customer and I knew what kind of company he and his father before him had built. He cares about his customers, he cares about his team, and he cares about this community. I've experienced Barano Heating and Air when they installed a complete system replacement a few years ago, and I enjoy peace of mind and same-day service with my Total Comfort Service Agreement. I've also been behind the scenes at their office and seen firsthand the true character of this company, and that's why we're so proud to represent them. To learn more or to schedule an appointment online anytime, visit baranoac.com. They really always will be there for you. And now back to the show. All right, in the middle of your publishing, I guess between the second and third books, in 2015, you attended a literary festival that would change your life and change this community. So tell us about that inspiration that would lead to Word of South, which has become a real staple in our community now for 10 years.
Well, thanks. Well, so the seed for it started probably in the about when I was after the Gendarme was published. I was invited to speak at a number of literary festivals around the country. I had never been to one, so I went to the Southern Festival of Book in Nashville. I was at what was then the St. Pete Times Book Festival, the South Carolina Literary Festival, the Decatur Book Festival. And so I'm thinking, man, we should do this in Tallahassee. They're free. It's all these people that love books. It's, but I was on the city commission then. I said, I need to get off the commission because this would be too much conflict, too much work. So I got off and I thought about it for a while. Did I really want to do this? So if you'll recall, back during when I was a commissioner, somewhere in midstream, so 2005, 2006 or so, the commissioners, I voted against it, passed deferred comp, okay?
Yes.
And it was basically, sort of voting ourselves a pay increase, which I didn't.
But it doesn't look as bad.
Yeah, well, I was the lone vote against it. I said, well, no, I respect everybody else, but I knew what I knew what the salary was when I came in. So,
Right.
So it continued on for a few years, and then sort of the public sort of got wind of it, and it got shut down a little while later. Well, when I left the city commission, I mean, I had this money in my name, it's basically my money illegally. And so, I never voted for it. I didn't want this. So I donated the bulk of it to start this literary festival. Oh. And so our first year, we accumulated, we got some other money. Our first year was 2015, and we had an awesome lineup. And it rained all weekend long. Mm-hmm. And so we were at Cascades Park, and we weren't quite prepared for this. And so things got canceled, things got moved around. It was a mess. I mean, we had major people getting yanked off the stage. Tony Hale, the actors, pulled off the stage, because of a lightning at in the Cascades Park. And I saw him recently. I said, "Do you remember that?" And he goes, "Yeah."
Because he was at Tallahassee Little Theater,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Tallahassee guy.
Yeah. But anyway, so even after all that.
Or Young Actors Theater. Sorry, he was at Young Actors Theater.
Even after all that, we said, we feel like we sort of have something here. And so we've kept going. So we're here. This will be year 12 and next year, wow. 26. And there's really nothing like this in the country. It was one of the cool things about it. And so we combine authors and musicians in all sorts of different ways. And we have authors who sing and musicians who've written books. And we pair them together sometimes, people that have never met. We have cookbook authors that we have somebody come make their dishes. And so it's all been a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work. And it's like everything else. All our costs are going up. And we're in our second consecutive year of getting no money from the state for this, which originally had been a fifth of our budget. Mm-hmm. So we're still rocking on. We'll have a big festival last weekend in April next year.
Yeah. So starting the process, when you had this idea, who did you go to first? Who told you yes first? I mean, how did you get the ball rolling in the process?
Well, I talked first with other writers here in town, and many were like, no, thanks, but I don't know about that. That's a lot of work, Yeah. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're probably right. And then there was a KCCI group that was talking about, they wanted to, one of their projects was going to be to start a music festival in Tallahassee. And so Mandy Stringer was in the class, and Mandy and I started talking. And
with Tallahassee Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah, and she became the first director of Word of South. And so Mandy was our director for the first 2 years. And Mandy, knew how to put on events, knew how, it was very beneficial. And then Scott Carswell has suggested, hey, you guys ought to bring on Mark Striffler from FSU because he's put on a lot of events too, which we did. And Mark is still our producer of the festival. Mm. So we sort of got this team together, people that at least had done this before to a degree. There's nothing exactly like this, but we've honed it now through. So we have a lot of the core group still there, and everybody sort of knows what to do and how to do it. And we try to keep it fresh. The one thing I have to be the bad guy on is every artist who's attended Word of South wants to come back. And and we,
which is a good thing.
Well, it is, but we want it, I don't want for the attendees, people go, well, this is the same. I just saw this, that's going to be this and this and this. So, right. So we try and really keep it fresh and do different stuff. But I'm pleased with the way it's turned out.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. And when you look back over the evolution of it and the natural changes that would occur, are you happy with where you started and where it is today?
Yeah, I think so. So when we first started it, well, first I thought I would be out of it in like 5 years. I was thinking, man, we're going to hand this off to FSU, and I'm gone. But now I'm still there, and I'm proud of what we've done. And I had originally envisioned the model being sort of like a music festival where you pay $300 for the weekend, you get a wristband, you go to wherever you want.
Multiple stages and all of that.
And we do have multiple stages, and you can go to wherever you want, but it's free except for the ticketed show Friday night. Mm-hmm. And I like the way that's turned out. It broadens our audience. It gives people something that they can, that they can sort of, can come try if they, so let's see if I like it or not. And it's very gratifying to hear. Every year I hear people say, "Oh yeah, we come up for Cocoa every year for this. There's nothing like it," And so yeah, there is nothing like it.
That's awesome. You also recently published your third book, Boy with Wings. Mm-hmm. right? So what inspired you to write that, and tell us that story a little bit?
Well, I've been asked that question a lot, and I wish I had a better answer to this. I should make one up, actually. But I don't know. I've always been sort of fascinated with this general area. And maybe it's from attending the North Florida Fair as a child and so going to the
Surviving
exhibits.
That should be a whole book unto itself.
See the world's smallest horse, or, the wild man from Borneo or whatever.
The woman without a head.
Yeah. And so I had, again, I've had the idea to write this for a long, long time. And I talked to my agent about, said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And he said, well, have you read the book Geek Love, which I'd never heard of, and I hadn't. And I did. And I said, oh, man, this is really good. I need to think about how, I do this differently from what was done there. And so I started it, stopped it, and finally kind of got it going. And then I had wanted to interview a current sideshow performer just to see, get their perspective, see if I, am I portraying this accurately, and I couldn't find anybody. And it was frustrating because, Florida, the circuses and even the sideshows, all wintered in Florida. So down around Bradenton, Sarasota, there's communities where retired circus people live. And there's museums. I went down there, I tried, couldn't do anything. And so...
Yeah, the Ringling Museum is there.
And the American Sideshow Museum.
I didn't know that.
So a much smaller operation. But... So lo and behold, what do I see? But there's a sideshow coming to Tallahassee. So I sign up for the VIP experience where I get to meet the performers and everything, and then it cancels. Uh-huh. And then I see it's coming back, Right. And so I pay again. I go down. This was going to be at the Junction down there at the House of Music, and I get down there and they go, "Oh, you're not here for that sideshow, are you?" Yeah, they canceled. I'm like, oh my God. But I was able to get a website and email address for this one guy. And his stage name is Short E. Dangerously. And he is a half man. He has no legs. His body's cut off sort of right below at the rib cage. And so we made contact, and he agreed to let me interview him at some bookstore events because the book had already been finished by now. So we did, and we did one in Miami and one in Savannah. And it was very interesting because I told him when we set it up, I said, Shorty, I just want to ask you about your life. So what is it like for you to come in the room and everybody's turning and looking because you look differently than everybody else? Mm-hmm. And so we talked about that and, sort of his life. He says, there's several statues of me around the world, but in one respect, just kind of a regular guy. And so, and he said, I'm not an inspiration. I don't want to be an inspiration. I'm just a survivor, you know? And he paid me several compliments. One, he asked me, he said, well, how did you do your research for this? Because he said, you nailed the sideshow part.
Well, can you touch on the premise of the book a little bit just so people understand the context?
Yeah, so the book is about a boy that has these strange appendages on his back, and they sort of begin to develop as he grows older and become to look like wings. And so he ends up in a freak show in the 1930s traveling the South, and people have different reactions to him. Is he an angel? Is he a devil? What is this? So the book has elements of race and religion in it, but more than anything, it's about what does it mean to be different. And, in this day and age, that's a pretty important thing. Yeah. So that's the premise of the book. That's why I wanted to talk to Shorty, because he's clearly different. You're just looking at him. And I had structured the book.
What did he say? I interrupted you, but what did he say about walking into a room and being everybody looking at him?
Well, I asked him, said, well, do you like to be on stage? He says, I love it. It's one of the best parts of my life. I said, well, how is it for you to go in Walmart? And he said, well, it sort of depends on what kind of day I'm having. He said, if I go in there and I'm not having a good day and people say, oh, it's so good to see you out today, like I'm out every day, Right. So that was, again, I thought a very human reaction. So he toured the world for years with, doing this sort of thing. And if you go on his website, the picture of him on the cover is with a mask on, breathing fire. And when we set up the bookstore thing, I said, Shorty, we're going to be in bookstores. There's no breathing fire here. Okay?
Lots of flammable stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so he was that all worked out well.
Yeah, that's great. Well, speaking of books and bookstores, I recently had Sally Bradshaw on, owner of Midtown Reader. So I wanted to get your perspective as an author on the importance of having a local bookseller, especially one that supports local authors as well as Sally does.
Well, it's just a godsend. First, the independent bookstores, there's nothing against Barnes & Noble and the chains, but the independent bookstores are part of the community. and Sally and Midtown Reader are particularly good with local authors and, and wanting to champion Florida and Florida authors. I just toured their new space that's still under construction yesterday. That's going to be super nice and a great place to see author events.
Yeah.
So, thank goodness they're here. I hope they stay forever and ever. But it's interesting that I've learned more about the book business. And it's, it's a business just like anybody else. They have to make money. The publisher has to make money. The agent has to make money. And so, a lot of when people go and, why can't I get my book published? Well, how are these people going to make money on it? Because it's a business. And so that's, and I guess, I don't know why I never realized this, but if you see like a stand of books on the, the end, well, that's not just because the bookstore wanted to put there. I mean, somebody's paid for that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So how's the book doing so far?
The book's doing well. I tell people I'm like the MVP of the minor leagues because I've won, for a while I won every award I submitted for. And, some of these include, self-published authors or whatever, independent books. But I mean, it's pretty, the interesting thing, I've won in a number of genres. The book is historical fiction, but it has this sort of magical realism element. So I've won several historical fiction awards. I won the grand prize for fiction from an independent book awards company. I've won for cross-genre fiction. I've won for literary fiction. I'm shortlisted for one for paranormal fiction. So it's all, the big awards are coming up. I think my streak will probably come to an end then. But still, it's nice.
Awesome.
It's nice to be recognized. I mean, there's so much sort of, rejection and somebody, it's very disheartening. You work for, you spend years of your life working on something and somebody glances at it for 10 minutes and goes, yeah, maybe not. And people ask me, well, do you read the reviews on Goodreads? And the answer is basically no. Everybody has a different view of, everybody.
It's not written for everybody.
No, it's very subjective. So I, and I console myself that if you look at like the last, 10 Pulitzer Prize winners and look at what they're rated on Goodreads, it's not that good. It's no better than my book's rated. So
that's great. All right. So we have not talked about your family. Mm-hmm. So want to get into that a little bit. Your wife, Greta, how did you meet and what is your story?
We met in the Governor Square Mall, believe it or not. And I was there with a friend of mine who knew her. And I knew who she was because one of my best friends had dated her. And I just had never, and he was gaga over her, but I just had never met her.
Right.
And so as fate would have it, the next night after we met in the mall, we were all at Studebaker's together. And so from that point forward, we started dating.
Watching them sing and dance and all the fun 50s stuff,
right?
Right?
Exactly. So we started dating and we got married in 1991. And so then we have 3 children. My son, Byrne, is a musician in Nashville. And my middle daughter, Eva, is getting her PhD at FSU in environmental science. And the youngest daughter, Jackie, is a lawyer in Miami.
Okay.
So so they're all doing pretty well. And we have my wife's family's from the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, and so we inherited her mom's house up there. And so Greta was to be up there during the summer, and I'm still working, so I'm sort of back and forth. But it is gorgeous up there, and it's a lot cooler than Tallahassee in July.
Yeah.
So we've been spending a bit of time there.
Good. So she's been along for the ride with all the riding and all the festival and all the activities.
Oh, yeah. She's an ambassador at the festival. We assign, and I always assumed like all festivals do this, but apparently not because we get like great kudos about it. But we assign all of the artists as somebody to help them get around. If you got to be picked up from the airport, you need here's where the green room is, here's where your stage is, that sort of thing. And so she's an ambassador for usually for several acts during the festival. And she's as I said, a big reader and a big music person too.
Yeah, awesome. We can't leave this discussion without talking about your dad for a minute, if that's okay. People are probably familiar with him from the TMH Surgery and Critical Care Center that now bears his name. But he was an administrator for 25 years around then, right? Mm-hmm. And responsible, I was doing some research for this, and responsible for some pretty amazing innovations at the hospital. A lot of important things changed under his leadership. So as a kid growing up, did you understand or know that was happening, or was it just your dad at his job, or what were your thoughts during all that period?
Well, Somewhere in between those. I mean, it was more than just that he had a job. I mean, he was a very important person in the community. And when running for office, I knocked on a lot of doors and I ran into a lot of people that knew him. Some people didn't like him, but almost everybody respected him. That was the time, and I remember when this happened, that, there used to be a separate hospital at FAMU. They closed that hospital and brought all the patients and employees to TMH. And that was controversial. Some people didn't want to be cared for by a black person.
Right.
And, that was part of the things that changed during that period. He was responsible for buying the 80 acres sort of behind TMH that at the time people called it Mustian's folly because it was like, we're never going to use that. We're paying all this money for that.
Yeah.
Well, now
it turned out to be pretty important.
Wish they had some more. So that was, and then they. And this is, relates to all the current situation. They changed from a municipal hospital to a nonprofit hospital.
I saw that.
Yeah, sort of in
1976,
yes,
right?
That's being discussed now as part
this
of
week, literally. Yes.
So there was a lot of stuff that happened, and I was familiar with that. I mean, he was, my mom, who's still alive, says, the hospital was his life. I mean, he put heart and soul into it.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. All the, the Heart Center and the Golden Gala. Was that his idea?
I don't know if it was his idea, but it definitely started when he was there because I went to the first one, Barbara Mandrell.
Not the sisters, just Barbara.
Yes.
Well, that is considered to have, that is an incredible legacy all by itself. All right, so Mark, looking back, what would you say is the one thing or person that changed or altered the trajectory of your life to this point?
I don't know that there was just one. I mean, probably my father, actually, because, he was a public figure. And I think that was why I wanted to be, I wanted to be student body president. I wanted to be on the city commission. That was certainly part of that, I think. If I look back, why do I want to do this, sort of thing. As I said, he was, people respected him. I hope people respect me. I try to garner their respect. I would say it's probably him.
Was it him as a role model or did you have discussions with him about those things, about leadership and, caring about the community and finding ways to serve the community, or was it just watching him work?
I think more watching him. I was talking with my mother about this the other day. So he was, small talk was not his thing. So he was a very,
heart to hearts.
Well, heart to hearts happen sometimes, but because that was serious stuff. So he didn't have a lot of time for foolishness. That's what we,
Okay.
And so I inherited some of that. I would be on the city commission. Hey, let's get to the substance here. Come on,
Right.
I don't know that he necessarily, was saying, oh, I hope you'll do this, I hope you'll do that. But he was supportive, every step of the way. And I could watch what he was doing, which is pretty important.
Yeah. All right, final question. The podcast is named How I Got Here. So we've talked about how you got to this point in your life. Where do you think here might be for you in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I want to still be the multifaceted person I hope to today. I'm going to phase out of the law practice over that period of time, and that's getting ready to start. I plan to still be at Word of South. I hope we're, in 5 years, we're on super sound financial footing. We maybe have a national sponsor. That would be, I'd love to be right there. I'd love to have at least one more book published with maybe another, in the wings. And then I hope I'm healthy and still here talking to you, Dave.
Do you have an idea for the book yet?
Yeah, but I'm superstitious about talking about it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have another historical fiction that I've pretty much written. I'm starting one now that's a little bit more of a Southern novel. I always hate to tell people, I'm working on this and this, and then they say, what happened to the Revolutionary War novel? I'm like, I couldn't get it published, so I'll wait till it gets, till I sign a contract. Then we can talk all about it.
Thanks for listening to the show. You can subscribe at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review. It really does make a difference. Thanks to my amazing staff at Fiore Communications, who pick up the slack while I'm working on these podcasts, and to Troy Bloom for composing our theme music. You can hear more of Troy's creations on Facebook and Instagram at Troy Bloom Music. To connect with the podcast or suggest a future guest, follow us on social media or email us at podcast@fiorecommunications.com. tallahassee.com.